Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about something that I think is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Over the last few months, we've been covering lots of individual stories coming out of Russia: high interest rates, rising inflation, labour shortages, businesses struggling, fuel shortages, refinery attacks, falling investment. On their own, each of these stories was interesting, but when you start joining the dots together, a much bigger picture begins to emerge. And today we've had another important piece of that puzzle. Fresh economic data suggests that Russia's slowdown isn't just continuing, it's actually accelerating. What's particularly concerning is that the weakness is no longer confined to one part of the economy. It's spreading into the services sector, which makes up the largest share of economic activity in any modern economy. So in today's video, I want to explain what these latest figures are telling us, why they matter, and why they could have a much bigger implication for the Russia economy over the next few months. But before we get into the details, if you're enjoying these videos and find them useful, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button. And if you're enjoying this video, or you think you're going to, then please give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't used the YouTube hype facility before, it would be fantastic if you could hit that hype button. It really does help me with the algorithm and also puts a smile on my face. One of the most widely watched indicators of economic activity is something called the Purchasing Managers' Index, or PMI. Rather than looking backwards, it surveys thousands of businesses each month and asks whether things are improving, staying the same, or getting worse, because it's often one of the best leading indicators of where an economy is heading. A reading above 50 indicates expansion, below 50 indicates contraction in the economy. Russia's Services PMI has now remained below that crucial 50 level for the past 3 consecutive months, and today's report shows that conditions have deteriorated further. More importantly, the pace of decline is now accelerating. Perhaps the most worrying figure from Russia's point of view is new business. Companies reported that new orders are falling at the fastest rate since December 2022, and 2022 was the year that the war in Ukraine started. That's significant because businesses don't suddenly start laying off people or cutting investment for no reason. It normally starts with fewer customers walking through the door, fewer contracts being signed, and fewer enquiries coming in. If new business dries up, everything else tends to follow. The report also showed employment falling at the fastest rate in several years. Again, that's another major warning sign. Businesses generally don't enjoy reducing staff. Recruitment is expensive, especially in Russia at the moment, and training people takes time. If companies are deciding that they now need fewer employees, it's usually because they expect demand to remain weak for some time. Business confidence has also fallen close to multi-year lows. When confidence disappears, investment often disappears with it. Companies postpone expansion plans, they delay buying equipment, they hold off hiring new people, they become much more cautious. And that creates a feedback loop that can slow an economy even further. Now, if you've been watching the channel over the past few months, none of this should come as a complete surprise. We've talked extensively about the impact of Russia's very high interest rates. The central bank has been forced to keep borrowing costs at historically elevated levels because inflation has remained stubbornly high. While there have been signs that inflation is beginning to ease, that doesn't necessarily mean the economy is becoming healthier. Sometimes inflation falls because consumers simply stop spending, and that appears to be what's happening in Russia. When interest rates remain high for a prolonged period, as they have over the last few years, borrowing becomes more and more expensive. Mortgage payments increase, business loans become more costly, car finance becomes less affordable, credit card debt becomes more expensive. All of that reduces disposable income and discourages spending. Consumers start to tighten their belts, businesses see fewer customers, profits begin to fall, then investment slows and employment starts to weaken. And eventually those trends start showing up in surveys like the PMI report. It's also worth remembering that the services sector is enormous. People often focus on manufacturing because it's easier to picture factories producing goods. But services include everything from restaurants and hotels to transport companies, IT firms, financial services, professional advisors, healthcare, retail, logistics, and countless other industries. When the sector starts slowing, it affects a much larger proportion of the economy. At the same time, many Russian companies are still facing labour shortages because so many workers have either joined the military, left the country, or are now employed in defence industries. Normally, labour shortages would push wages higher and support consumer spending, but what we're now seeing is that demand appears to be weakening enough to outweigh those wage pressures. That's another important change. We've also been covering the growing problems in Russia's energy sector. Fuel shortages have spread across multiple regions. Refineries have been disrupted by the attacks from drones. Some areas have introduced restrictions on fuel sales, a maximum of 20 litres per person. And as we discussed in recent videos, Russia is now importing fuel and allowing lower quality fuel because it's absolutely desperate. And it's worth remembering that fuel disruption and higher prices feed into every part of the economy. Transport becomes more expensive, businesses face higher operating costs, consumers pay more for goods and services, margins come under pressure, confidence starts to weaken. Another issue here is uncertainty. Businesses can generally cope with difficult conditions if they know what conditions are going to be in the future. What they struggle with is unpredictability. Should they invest? Should they start that new factory or create a new product line? Should they recruit? Should they bring in more people? Should they borrow money to fund all of that? Or should they just wait? That uncertainty often causes companies to postpone decisions. And when enough businesses all decide to wait at the same time, economic growth slows further. The government is also facing increasingly difficult choices. Military spending remains extremely high, supporting parts of the economy connected to defence. We've talked a lot about the switch to the wartime economy. But outside of those sectors, many private businesses are operating in much more challenging environments. That creates a growing imbalance. The economy starts becoming increasingly dependent on government spending rather than broad-based private sector growth, and that's generally much more difficult to sustain over the long term. So where does all of this leave Russia? Well, I think today's report tells us something very important. For a long time, many of the negative stories coming out of Russia could be dismissed as isolated problems. One refinery being hit wasn't a major problem. One region experiencing fuel shortages was just a short-term blip. One industry struggling wasn't something to lose any sleep over. One company reporting weaker profits was just down to that business. But today's data suggests that those individual problems are now combining into something much broader. Weaker consumer demand, weaker business confidence, falling employment, slowing investment, higher borrowing costs, and growing pressure across multiple sectors simultaneously. Now, this doesn't mean that the Russian economy is on the verge of collapsing tomorrow. Economies don't work like that. They tend to weaken gradually. The danger is that once momentum is lost, like it has been in Russia, rebuilding confidence can take a very long time. That's why today's PMI report matters. This isn't just another monthly statistics. It's another indication that the slowdown we've been discussing for months is now becoming much more embedded across the wider economy. And that's something investors, businesses, policymakers, and the Kremlin will be watching very closely over the next few months. And I'll keep you posted on any further news and developments and statistics that are released out of Russia as soon as they're available. But hopefully you found today's video useful, informative, and most importantly, thought-provoking. If you did like what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And as I said earlier, if you've got the option to hype this video, then please do that, because that will really help me with the algorithm and ensure that more people get the chance to watch this video. I'd like to say thank you to everybody that's supporting me. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me YouTube super thanks or signed up as a patron or a member, I really appreciate that support. Thank you so much. It really does help to keep me motivated and making as many videos as possible. So thanks a lot. Also wanted to mention my new venture, Build and Design, is now live. I've teamed up with a master builder friend of mine. We're posting lots of really interesting things about property, real estate, design, all sorts of different things. I think you're going to like it. Check out the link at the end of today's video. It'll take you through. If you could subscribe and watch some of the content, that would be fantastic, because we're right at the start of our journey, so we need as much support as possible. So Thank you if you're going to do that or you've already done it. Really appreciate it.